country's foremost scholars on Jewish klezmer music. He's an award-winning musician, composer, photographer, documentary filmmaker, author, and playwright. We're so excited to have you all with us today, and we will be able to have Q&A at the end of the event. Without further ado, here's Yale.
So today, yes, we'll talk about the history of Yiddish theater and look at a little bit of its influences and modern culture of America. So a lot of people don't realize that in Central East European Jewish culture, theater's been a part of the Jewish experience through, probably as early as the 5th, 6th century, actually, going back to plays like the Purim Spiel. You've heard of that, the Purim Spiel, spiel meaning play, to play, and the play, the drama, and Purim being, of course, that festival that we all know about. And so there were these Purim Spielers, as I said, as early as the 5th, 6th century, and some would go from village to village performing during, not only on Purim, but a couple days before, a couple days, of course, during and after. And also, which is interesting, is that with the typical Purim play, with the characters of Haman and Vashti and Mordechai, Achashverosh, Esther, were all played by men. So we had Jewish men cross-dressing as women 1,000 years ago, and that is due to the orthodoxy, the of not having women perform on stage in front of men, Jewish men, performing, acting, as well as singing. And so it was men playing all the roles. That story, the Purim story itself, is the most famous, but there was other stories that they would do at this time as well, or sometimes during Hanukkah as well, a festival of celebration. And so there would be the Antiochus story, the Maccabees. There would be also the selling of Joseph was a common tale. Joseph, Jacob's son, being sold into slavery into Egypt. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Those are the Hanukkah story, the Joseph story, and the Purim story were the main ones that you see being played. And so in the vernacular, what were they, 6th, 7th, 8th century? It was an early type of Yiddish in Europe, with some Hebrew of part of that as well. So theater, telling a story, passing down culture, passing down songs, having musicians play for the actors is something that didn't just begin in the 19th century and, of course, the 20th century. So I just wanted to let you know that it's been part of our tradition, Jewish Yiddish tradition. In fact, it says as early as the 5th century in the region of Antioch, which is, of course, in the Syrian region today. It was the custom for Jews to gather in the synagogue courtyard in a happy, untidy procession. Sometimes they went outside the city gates carrying a dummy representing Haman, whom they hanged in effigy, burned in a bonfire. Around the fire, they sang, told jokes, and traded insults. So this is early on, but let's get into what we the main focus is the Yiddish theater that we know of it today. So the Yiddish theater that we know of it today has its starts in Eastern Europe. So the Purim Spiel is still going, but outside the Purim Spiel, Achashverosh Spiel, the Yosef Spiel, a few of those, there really wasn't a organized aspect of Yiddish theater. And so what there was, though, there were itinerant musician singers. And originally, this one group came from the shtetl of Brodie, B-R-O-D-Y, Brodie, in the Ukraine today. And so all the other singers afterwards who did this singing storytelling on a stage, sometimes with jokes, maybe a little, so you're telling this little story that takes 5 minutes, you play the same person plays all the roles, there's a little background music perhaps, one fiddler, a cymbal player, perhaps a bassist, and then that little skit, 5 minutes. Then there'd be another little skit. So they were known as Brodie Singers. So even though years later, and this started in the 1840s actually, and as it went over several decades, even though the people didn't come from Brodie, if you're an historian, you call them he was part of that Brodie tradition as the Brodie Singers. The original came from the shtetl Brodie, but not everyone afterwards came from there. They were just called that. And so the Brodie Singers, so they were doing this, you could call it a little skit theater, and it came, and it was going all through. It was in Poland, Ukraine, Romania, and it was in 1862 that Shlomo Ettinger, who was a student at the Rabbinical Seminary in Zhytomyr, which is Ukraine, and he put on a Yiddish play, a Purim spiel, all in Yiddish, and who happened to see it was Avram Goldfaden, who is from the Ukraine, Odessa. And it really struck him. He loved it. He liked the theatrical aspect of it. He liked the music, the story. He also was looking at the audience reactions and so forth. And remember, Yiddish, this was a very important thing too. There was live music, storytelling, some literature being printed if you could afford a book, and then theater. So there wasn't a lot of outlets to be able to explore your creativity and to just relax. A long week of over 40 hours easily. Often if you're poor, making sure you had something for Shabbos at the end of the week, etc. So life, its ups and its downs, and I'm not even mentioning, of course, the peripatetic lives they had living under the Tsar, right? Sometimes okay, other times not okay, and meaning it could result in pogroms, which the worst could happen is death. There was also rape and pillage and thievery, etc. So the life was peripatetic, as I said, and theater allowed an outlet to just forget about some of these troubles you have, and you sat back and you enjoyed it, or yourself just wanted to be in it and to act in it. So Goldfaden eventually finds his way into Romania. And the main reason was it was going to be his time to serve in the Tsarist army. And at that time, until the end of the Tsarist Empire in 1917, 1 out of every 5 Jews had to serve in the Tsarist army 25 years. It's a long time. And no one knew who was going to be one of the 5. It generally was the poor Jewish families that had to give up that son. The rich were able to bribe the choppers, the ones who grabbed the child, or the Tsarist military authorities that came to your particular town. So he didn't want to take a chance. He crossed the border. He crossed the Dniester, D-N-E-I-S-T-R. That's a very famous river that borders today parts of Ukraine, parts of Romania, as well as Moldova. Of course, this was all Tsarist Russia. And so he runs across, and from Odessa comes over to Yash, I-A-S-I. Often in history books, you see it spelled Jassy, Jassy or Yassi, but it's Iasi. And for those who are just curious about the city, places, and how you pronounce them, anything that ends in SI in Romanian, last name, place name, location, is sh. So it's just Yash, as if you were spelled it Yash. So he comes into Yash, and he's there in 1876. Now let me get this exact. I can look at my exact notes here. Let me look here. Go find. Ready. And I want to say, so he comes to Yash, which is a university city, by the way. And what's interesting about Yash, and also at this time for Eastern Europe, you have to remember there is the Haskalah and Hasidism. Hasidus and Haskalah, right? Haskalah, as we say in Yiddish, Haskalah, the Enlightenment, and Hasidim. Not that all Jews who were Orthodox or traditional were Hasidim, but Hasidism was taking a strong hold on a wide swath of Jewish population. Poland and Ukraine, Romania. We don't think of Hasidim in Romania, but it's very true. Parts of Eastern Slovakia and Hungary as well. And so you have this these two factors. One, the Hasidim, who are traditional, very Orthodox Jews, but Kabbalistic. And to put it in simple terms, Torah and Talmud study was important, but being happy and being able to connect with God, Hashem, he, she, it, they, in a more direct way than just study and doing mitzvot, good deeds, just because you're supposed to, was through prayer and through singing prayer. So this aspect of song is important, and they really push us. So in the world of just musicians or people who like to sing songs, now you have another. You have these Jews who like to sing songs. You have Rabbonim, Rebbes, who are writing nigunim, Hasidic nigunim, because that had words in Yiddish, as well as Yiddish, Hebrew, and sometimes Yiddish, Hebrew, Romanian, Yiddish, Hebrew, Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew, Hungarian, these macaronic tunes that use two or more different languages. Haskalah, where does that come into it? The Enlightenment. We're Jewish, but we want to be enlightened. We don't want to look things only through a narrow lens. We want to look at it in a holistic way. And so that meant I still keep kosher. I want to study some Talmud and Torah, but I'm also a mathematician. I want to study math or science, geometry, algebra, medicine, and other literature outside of just the narrow Talmud, Torah, and the midrashim, stories, and so forth. These homiletic, biblical stories based on the Bible, Chumash, etc. Literature, whether it's Gogol, whether it's Victor Hugo, Shakespeare, etc., etc., as well as Yiddish writers that we're starting to write now. At the same time, at the early development of Yiddish theater, we're going to see Yiddish literature start to create. And so Mendel Mochos Seforim, Mendel, the book peddler, he's considered sort of the grandfather of Yiddish theater, starting in the 1860s. So with Mendel Mochos Seforim, Yitzhak Leib Peretz, I.L. Peretz, and of course the most famous that all of you know, I'm sure every one of you have heard of, is Shalom Aleichem. These three, that troika they form of Yiddish literature, and people just their minds and imaginations expanding. So you have the Hasidim, Nigunim, melody, singing, dancing, literature, Yiddish literature, and so now we're going to have Yiddish theater. So, so Goldfaden, he comes to Yash, 1876, and there's different versions of this, but he goes to hear. Who does he go to? He goes to hear. Um, goes to hear a Brodie singer. That's it, a Brodie singer. Maybe like the Brodie original. Name was Israel Grodner. And he goes to the place called Pomo Verde. Shimon Marx, a Jewish man, owned a small little outdoor winery, wine cafe. We have these in San Diego. You know, that's a big thing. Like, just come, you have a little crudité, and but drink your wine. So they had these wine cafes, and particularly Yash, right? Because also this region is very fertile in the way the weather is, and moisture, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a vintner, so I don't know much, but it is known for good wines there. People buy Moldavan wines and Romanian wines from this region. And so during the spring, summer, early fall months, because it was out, the stage was outside and people were sitting outside the cafe, they would invite these Brodie singers to do their little skits and some jokes and sing songs and maybe play a few tunes. And so Goldfaden was there, and he saw them, and he saw this man, Israel Grodner, Grodner, and he befriended him, and he said to him, because he got this idea, he's looking around, you know, Goldfaden's sitting in the audience, he said, wow, these people really enjoy it. What if you just take that little skit and add maybe a second, third, maybe fourth scene? Instead of 5 minutes, make it 20 minutes, maybe 30, with music, singing, and a story that grabs the people. And so he goes to Grodner, and he convinces him, let's try to do this. He says Grodner was an enterprising young man. He had begun his work as a cigarette maker, and he was like a typical Brodie singer. He had very little education, but a great deal of natural talent for singing and mimicry. He was also a clever businessman. Ignoring the small towns, he used to come into a city, hire the largest playing area available, build a raised platform for a stage, and set up a number of benches. So anyhow, Goldfaden says, oh, I can sing and I have a story. So anyhow, the first time Goldfaden does it, and he says, okay, you want to come up, you know, let me do my thing, start it, and then the second half you do it. And he did, and they, from what we in the reviews, you know, Goldfaden with this cravat, you know, and all buttoned up, and his hat, he was very stilted, and you know, his voice was okay. Wrote very beautiful melodies and songs, and I'll talk to you a little about that and play one or two at the end. I'm sure you'd like to hear a little of the music, some of the Yiddish theater music, and the people were very quiet, and yeah, like they couldn't wait till they get off the stage, and waited for Grunt to come back on to be hilarious and joking and liven it up. And so guys that Goldfaden didn't really have it as the stage man, as the actor, singer, but instead he had the head for being a director, for writing plays and putting music, and this got him started. And so this thus begins the first Yiddish theater, real Yiddish theater, where it has a home in Iași, Romania, 1876 at the Pomo Verde. And Goldfaden, he stays there and he's doing, and then of course he travels. He realizes that this can be successful in Odessa and in other cities, Bucharest, where they didn't, where they would come up and set for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so these Yiddish traveling theater troupes. And also, what it is what it starts to spread his music, some of his most famous songs, like I'll play for you. Oifen Priberchik is the most famous. Da 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 dee 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 dee. Da 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 dee 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 dee. Da 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 da. Ya da dee da da dum. Ya da dee dee dee. et cetera, et cetera. And so these came from his plays. And so this he was very good at, and he was a good promoter. And so thus starts the interest in these theater troupes. And so there would be people that try out, and it was a part-time gig, talking about gig workers during this pandemic. It was not a gig that you could do full-time, except for Goldfund and his writing and so forth. But even he sometimes had to find outside work. And so people, amateur actors, would audition, and you just had to have a little talent, not have stage fright, and perhaps sing if you had a role that had to sing. And slowly but surely, this kind of entertainment spreads and creates a large interest among the Yiddish populace. Non-Jews would come to see these Yiddish theater plays. Some understood Yiddish, some spoke Yiddish. You're living with Jews or you're working with Jews, why wouldn't you, it's like someone here who's American born and speaks Spanish. Why not? If I live near Mexico or I work with Mexicans or Spanish-speaking people, we'll learn it. So there were a lot of Goyim, a lot of Gentiles that spoke Yiddish, and they would come and they enjoyed the theater and the songs and so forth. So this starts to create a group of artists, Kinstlers in Yiddish, Kinstlers, Spielers, players that now, and maybe it's not just part-time, but maybe they can make this full-time. And so Yiddish theater starts to really get a hold. And so by the end of the 19th century, it's well known in Eastern Europe. Now, in Romania, just want to say, because I'm going to switch to a little bit about the theater, how it comes to America, and I know the talk's called Romania. Now, Romania, so here, a lot of people, Romania, what's Romania? Well, for Jews, Yiddish culture, Yiddish theater. And what Goldfund did is he took it, it was Yiddish, but it was Yiddish musical theater. He saw that people liked to sing a song, learn the words, sing along with them, sing along with the ingenue, the lead, male, female, or the bad guy, whatever. And this is important because we'll talk about that as it translates over to America in just a moment. The other thing about Romania in terms of Jewish East European popular culture, the arts. You know me as a musician, many of you, I'm a composer, I play klezmer as well as other styles. In this region of Iași, north, eastern Romania. So if you don't know where it is, there's, here's the map of Romania. So up over here is Iași, and this borders Moldova right over there. It used to be all Bessarabia. So just, an hour's drive. Here's where my finger is, just right there is Chisinau. You've heard of that, right? Chisinau, as they say today, Moldova, the capital of Moldova. The Chisinau, as we know it, both for the positive Jewish life and also the sad pogroms. So this area was Bessarabia, and it was a hotbed of, so here we have Yiddish theater, and a lot of great Jewish musicians playing various styles of klezmer music, also learning from Roma, different styles, as well as Roma learning from Jews playing in the Roma bands, Roma playing the Jewish bands, Roma being gypsies, where it's better to use the word Roma, R-O-M-A. Has nothing to do with Roma, as in Rome, Italy. Just means man in Romani, their language, which is as a form of related to Sanskrit. So this region is a very rich area. And what's interesting, as old as I am, I'm not so old that I'm from the 19th century, but I was lucky enough to, when I started to do my ethnographic research, starting in the 80s, and would go to this area of Romania, other parts too, but right here, I still found Jewish musicians who had played Yiddish music before World War II. Some who I met the man who was the dramaturge for the Yiddish theater of Yash, Romania, until it stayed, by the way. So after World War II, you might say, oh, everything's done. 6 million Jews. It's all gray. It's all dark. It's sad. It's a vast cemetery. Some truths to that, but there still were Jews who were living in the East Bloc and making culture. And so here, the Yash Theater, by the way, continued. It stopped during the war years of 41 to 44 for Romania, then started up again. Well, then it started up again 46, and it stayed in Yash, the Yiddish theater, meaning there are Jews who are going to plays after World War II in Yiddish, and there were no super titles in Romanian up through 1960, 61. So I met one of the dramaturges there, and I met a woman who was the choreographer and so forth. When it closes there, and why is it closed? Well, Jewish population diminishing there, Jews of Yash going to Israel. A lot of Romanian Jews went to Israel, some to America, but more went to Israel. Strong Zionist movement, the very first Aliyah Aleph, the majority of the Jews in Aliyah Aleph in the 1890s were Romanian Jews. Anyhow, so it went to Bucharest, and then begins what they call the Yiddish State Theater of Bucharest, which is still in operation today. And I met the theater director who was there, who was a major Israel Berkovich. I met Elena Waldman, one of the few Jewish actors, because in these Yiddish theaters, as time went on, there were less Jews living there, but it's also just less Jews who wanted going into a field that's difficult to make a living. So it's non-Jews who are playing the roles and learning Yiddish enough to get by, at least in the play, understand what they're reading and say it with authenticity. So Romania really, and it's interesting, and so I still found some of these little nuggets of culture alive when I was doing 80s and 90s. Now, with the wall having come down, there's been a revival and so forth. Not in Yash so much, because a revival, you need numbers, you need people. Bucharest, there's a core of Jews there. Yash, somewhat, but not as much. The history's there, and I can take you and show you where the very first Yiddish musical was done with Avram Goldfaden. You can see with the antecedents of Yiddish Broadway. So I'll segue right now. Yiddish theater to America. So when Goldfaden immigrates to America, he decides to, and there's already some Yiddish theater here. It wasn't like he discovered it, starting in the 1890s, and he creates theater as well here. So there's many different theaters. In fact, I just wrote this down here. I was looking at an interesting note here, that by 1925, and any of you maybe are from New York originally or have family from New York, by 1925, there were 14 Yiddish theaters in New York City. They called it the Yiddish Theater District, sometimes known as the Yiddish Rialto or the Jewish Rialto District. And it ran from 2nd Avenue, if you know a little bit of the Lower East Side, and I've lived in New York. I lived for almost 20 years, so I know it. 2nd Avenue, it's going right north-south, and then going east all the way to Avenue B, right? So north-south, right, up, down, and then to Avenue B, and then lower down to Houston and 14th Street. So that was the Yiddish Theater District that had many Yiddish theaters built, and the biggest, the Yiddish Musical Theater of 2nd Avenue, the only building that's recognized as a national monument to Yiddish theater, is the one on 2nd and 12th. It's a movie theater today, but they kept the inside. If you go in the foyer, kept the original how it was for the Yiddish theater. You can see the Star of David there, and outside you see the cornerstone with the Hebrew date, et cetera, et cetera. And it's nice to see that there. And that theater had many stars. So Yiddish theater Oh, what do you know? I was wondering what she did. Okay, there you go. Second area. Thank you. So you see people, you see the name Malik Pekin, and there's Jacob Kalish, Joseph Rubshinsky, Irving Jacobson, and that was the play A Big Gazin, which became a very famous a song. And that is the Second Avenue, and that entrance looks just like that. Now, if you go a little bit to your right, and which you can't see it, but yes, and she has the map there. So when you visit New York next time, if you've never done a little Yiddish theater tour, you want to definitely check it out. Thank you so much, Eileen. So that's good. And there was Broadway. There was early Broadway, but what Yiddish theater did is, first of all, many of the writers, directors, choreographers, set designers, producers, actors went from Yiddish theater to Broadway. And what they also brought them is that tradition of the musical theater. The musical theater, there was musical theater, you know, Cohan, the Irish gentleman, and so forth. He had done some early stuff, but really this aspect of creating a musical with a story and music driven and song driven was something that was really so popular in Yiddish theater among thousands of thousands. Now, you know, we can't imagine, but, you know, up until 1920, so about 1.5 million Jews immigrated from 1881 to 1924. Not all settling in Lower East Side, a vast majority. Also, the other thing to think about, though, is, as I just told you, there was 14 Yiddish theaters in New York City in that age. But then what happens by the 20s is, so the Lower East Side, right, 1890s to World War I, concentrated with Jews. But then Jews doing a little bit better. The kids are getting a little older. Do they want to stay in the crowded Lower East Side tenements? No. And they're looking for a little space, a little fresher air. And so they start going to some of the boroughs, Brooklyn, but particularly the Bronx, uptown, right? And so there were small Yiddish theater troupes that were sometimes just housed in a community center, you know, no roof, you know, no title, nothing outside, you wouldn't know. And a lot of good theater was doing in these various little, in the coops, they call them, the co-ops, the coops of the Bronx, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of little Yiddish theater places that are only known to historians because they weren't written about or photographed. Let me talk to you about some of the actors and actresses that started in Yiddish theater, some in Eastern Europe, graduated to doing various kinds of Yiddish theater, and then were talented enough to cross over to whether Broadway and or to film. And that's interesting to talk about. I also want to just add one thing before I forget, is there were different styles of Yiddish theater. There was, what was his name? Jacob Ben Ami. There was like the Artef. There was like serious theater. Some felt the Yiddish musical theater was, oh, how should you put it? Not high theater. Some of the Yiddish directors, actors wanted to do what they considered more serious theater. Plays by Ibsen, Gogol, Gorky, Shakespeare, Turgenev, but in Yiddish, Strindberg, in Yiddish. And, you know, so not everything has to be a sing-along, you know, and there was or has to be shund. You know that word shund? In Yiddish, shund, I guess we translate it as schmaltzy, kind of, I don't want to say amateurish, but not as serious theater. Not to put it down, because people liked it, and it was a form of entertainment and a way to relax and sing along. And there's the good and the bad, and eventually the good wins over, you hope. But there were many actors who were influenced by Russian theater, by the way, by Russian theater, high art. These are Russian Jews, even though they're coming from Poland or perhaps Romania or Moldova regions or Ukraine, but they had been under the hegemony of Russia. So they considered some Russians. They spoke Yiddish, Russian, and whatever Romanian, Ukrainian, Belarusian. So they wanted to do this as well. So they created several of these theaters also in the New York region, the city and the region. So I don't want to make it that there's only Yiddish musical theater. So some of the actors that maybe you know, so there was, well, I see on my list, my first list is actually a composer. His name was Jacob. His brother name was Israel. Their last name was Gershowitz. Jacob and Israel Gershowitz, but better known as George and Ira Gershwin. And they lived 91 2nd Avenue between 5th and 6th Street. So they heard Yiddish theater, they heard Jewish musicians, they heard Yiddish on the street, they spoke Yiddish. So they came to their sensibilities of course, American culture, but combining it with some Yiddish aspect, a Jewish aspect. It's interesting. Another person who's from the Lower East Side, influenced by what he's hearing musically and everything, was Isidore Baleen, better known as Irving Berlin. Now Berlin, so Gershwin and Berlin, they stay in the musical area, of course, writing for Broadway, writing popular songs, as we know, Gershwin and Ira, wonderful Broadway plays. Berlin, his songs going to Broadway and then pop culture. And so they crossed over, having done some Jewish material early on, or have been influenced by Jewish material. But then their material that they did for the American public went so far beyond, of course, went to the world. Jacob Garfinkel, better known as John Garfield, right? American actor, 30s, 40s, 50s, played in Yiddish theater. His Mama Loshin was Yiddish, not English. Paul Weissenfund, I should say. He came from Shtetl Novi Sonj, Singaletia. It's a little east of Krakow. We know him as who, and his family, a Yiddish theater troupe. I was reading something in Yiddish, doing some klezmer research, and I come across this family, and I'm just reading about it and how they hire Jewish musicians, and they're playing in these shtetl. And then I read, and I go, oh my God, this is none other than Paul Muni, right? Paul Muni, who I think was nominated for a few Oscars. The great actor. Started off in Yiddish theater, Lower East Side. Walter Matthau didn't play in Yiddish theater, but he worked at Yiddish concessions and in the theater and selling stuff when he was a child. Malka Opikun from Poland, better known as Molly Pekin, right? Molly Pekin. And she crossed over, of course, she did Yiddish theater, and you know Molly Pekin. And I think maybe Eileen, you can throw up that poster that says Molly Pekin, Picon, P-I-C-O-N. If you have, oh good, she's going to do that. Yes, you see that, everybody? That says, of course, in English, you can read it as Bublitzki, or if you can read the Yiddish Bublitzki, it says, in Yiddish, it says Molly Pekin and Aaron Lebedev at the Public Theater. And it says, in a Naya Grossa Musikalischer in a new great musical triumph, played every Friday evening, Shabbos to Sunday, and every Friday evening, Shabbos at night, and matinees on Sunday. Anyhow, and that just shows you and these were common, these bills, these nice, beautiful flyers. I mean, they're artwork. Yes, here's one. And of course, in Yiddish, it's East Side Sadie, as it says, East Side Sadie. And let's see, who's playing this? Let's see, Kumjen, Come Now. Let's say, trying to see who the actors. Velzen. I'm not seeing the names, and it's kind of small for my eyes to read. But anyhow, you get a sense. And then this one, I'm glad she's right. So here's Molly Pecan and Jacob Kalish. But what's interesting here, what do you see, folks? You see it's a Teatro Excelsior, Muchacha del Circo, La Muchacha del Circo. Let's keep this up for a moment. So Yiddish theater, when it comes over to America in the just at the turn of the 20th century. By World War I, it's also spreading down to South America, particularly Argentina, but Brazil as well. Why? Yiddish speaking immigrants went and emigrated to these countries. First of all, particularly after 1924, when they couldn't come to America anymore, right? There's the quota system. We don't want any more of those Southeastern European types. That included Italians, Sicilians, Greeks, etc., Yugoslavs, and Jews. And so they went there, and there's Molly Pekin and Jacob Kalish and Aaron Lebedev and Menashe Skolnick and Boris Tomaszewski and Mordechai Schwartz. I'm just trying to think of names of Yiddish actors. They would do a Yiddish tour, because when it's summer, spring down here, it's fall, winter up north. So they could divide the season. And so there's a lot of nice poster art, and they were very well known. Also, just quick before we leave this poster, you see the name Abe Elstein. He was one of the big 4 composers. Abe Elstein, Shalom Secunda, and I'm forgetting the other 2. I want to say maybe it was Tomaszewski. You see his name, yes, L. And so he wrote many well-known Yiddish melodies that are very, very popular today. Just a few more names. Jacob Adler from Odessa. He was a big impresario actor, and his family, the Adlers, and who became the most famous from the Adler family was his youngest daughter named Stella. If you don't know the name Stella Adler, that means you haven't studied acting, I guess. You're not an actress or an actor. She started this very famous Stella Adler acting studio in New York City in 1949, eventually went to LA, and she was influenced by Stanislavski as a method, a certain way of teaching acting that was different. I know I'm getting a little on the side, but the main thing is here she started off in Yiddish theater. Yiddish was her mother tongue. And then she also did some Broadway. She even did some film. But she's most famous for is some of the greatest actors that she taught. And they taught her. Marlon Brando, Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel, Elaine Strick, et cetera, et cetera. And it's still known as the Adler School of Acting, and it's continuing today. Just the last few names, Philip Finkel. Well, you know him as Five-ish Finkel, right? He big time in Yiddish theater and crossed over to film, but particularly to television. I believe in the 90s, he was one of the stars of some sitcom. I don't remember the name. I don't watch a lot of sitcom television. The director-actor, Sidney Lumet, Lumet, Yiddish is first language. And, the dog, was it 12 Hours of the Condor or something? Big film, Sidney Lumet. I think he even did The Graduate, I think. Or maybe I'm wrong. You'll correct me. And one more, Emmanuel Goldenberg, better known as Edward G. Robinson. So anyhow, these people all got their start and eventually crossed over. And Molly Pekin, she kept her foot in the Yiddish theater, but also crossed over. She did some stuff. She played in the film, The Fiddler on the Roof. There is one Yiddish actor who did get nominated for an Oscar. She didn't win it, but she got nominated, meaning she was the only one that was her art form. But she did cross over to do other film, and that was Ida Kaminska. We talked about the Romanian school of Yiddish theater. There was also the Polish, the Kaminski family. And Esther Rochel was her mother, great doyen of Yiddish theater in Poland, Warsaw, which, by the way, there is a Warsaw Yiddish theater still today. And her daughter Ida, and Ida got nominated for her role. She did it all in Slovak. Polish was her native language along with Yiddish, but Slovak is similar to Polish, so she can learn it. And that was in the very famous 1964 movie Shop on Main Street. If you've never seen it, you should watch it. It's a great film, Holocaust-oriented, but very different point of view, looking at the Slovakian side of things. And she does such, and she plays basically herself, an older Jewish woman who's a button store, notion store owner. Okay, I've covered a lot. Let me play a couple of those melodies for you that come from Yiddish theater. Okay. So this one, Goldfund wrote. Remember from Pripper Chicks? So that's away from Pripyat, Avram Goldfund. Here's another song, those who know some Yiddish songs. And what's interesting, these are songs long remembered after people forgot the story of the Yiddish theater, the play that came from. That's not even being performed anymore. But the songs live on, and that's like anything, like, right? Some movies, they have great songs and you forget the movie, or even some Broadway stories that, the play was okay, but these musical pieces were great. This was sung by Sidney Lumet when he was 11 in Yiddish, director, actor, and it's known as Papi Rosen. Came from a 1931 play called Der Permeates, the Clown, by Herman Yablochkov, and it just goes like this. All right, and the last one, and then we'll open up some Q&A, is, I'll just play a little bit. This, I just want to make sure I get this one. You'll recognize, this is probably, well, this is the most famous song that originated from a Yiddish musical play. It actually was a Yiddish comedy. In Yiddish, they called it Men ken leben, nor men las nicht. Men ken leben, nor men las nicht, which in Yiddish means you can live, but they don't let you live. But in English, the play was known as I Would If I Could. The lyrics were written by Jacob Jacobs, and the melody by Shalom Secunda. And written in 1932, people didn't know about it, whatever. The story is that, you know, Jacob sold it for about $36, and as well as Secunda. They didn't make it. That's a dud. 5 years later, 1937, it becomes a hit, and it is this melody. And so forth. Of course, by Mir Duchesne. And so it shows you something in a play that no one even remembers the title. I didn't know. I had to look it up. I remember when it was written, but I didn't know the title. And we don't remember the lyricist. We remember Secunda because he continued on. Oh, that was it. So Secunda, along with Elstein, were some of the biggest Yiddish musical writers, writing songs that became crossed over into American public. Like this one, you might write that. Yoso, right? So, anyways, so many of these, so much of the remnants of Yiddish theater that remains is, of course, just in the songs. Yiddish theater today, America, we have the Volksbühne that's still going on. It's housed down the Lower East Side, not actually down the Jewish Museum. I forget the title actually, but it's in Battery Park, and they just had a successful run of Shalom Aleicham's Tevye der Mecheldicker, right? Tevye the Milkman, better known as Fiddler on the Roof, in Yiddish, directed by Joel Gray. And I actually know personally the music director there. Also, I just want one other thing, and then I will stop, to show the influence of Yiddish theater and the arts in America. So a man named Boris Aronson from Odessa, or somewhere in Ukraine, rabbi's son, did sets, designs, and costumes for Yiddish theater, and eventually he graduates to Broadway. And what does he do? I want to see. He does the sets, designs, and ends up winning 6 Tonys. He happens to do set design for Cabaret, for the play called Company, one called Follies, etc. So not just in the acting, in the writing, in the lyrics, but in set designs and so forth that were influenced by Yiddish culture that still influence popular Broadway musicals today. I was hoping to be leading a tour to Romania and Moldova through Ayelet Tours. Ayelet, they lead tours all over the world, Jewish-oriented tours, particularly Israel. Ayelet, AYELET.com. Ayelet. They've been doing it for 40 years. So they came to me and said, Yale, would you lead a tour to Romania and Moldova, with an emphasis on music and theater? And I said, yes. So we were supposed to, and it's not officially canceled for October, but I have a feeling it will be. But I talked to them just the other day. So you might just want to make a little note that I will be leading this tour, of course, in the new world of 2021 with the virus, as you say in Yiddish, the COVID-19, in October of 2021, and where there would be, I'll play some music with local musicians. We go to the Yiddish theater in Bucharest. We see the original Yiddish theater in Yash, Romania, and etc. Jewish oriented with the history and culture, but I bring that musical and theatrical component to it, having traveled many times throughout Romania, not just there, but we'll go to where Elie Wiesel lived, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested, just keep a note, iyelit.com, 2021 October, and if you're interested, you can certainly get information on it. So I open it up to some questions and comments. If anyone would like to ask?
If you'd like to unmute yourself or use the raise hand function, we can try to find you in the gallery view that way, but feel free to unmute and ask away.
That was great, Yale. Thank you very much. It's just so wonderful to hear. I'm curious what's happening today in Romania and that area with Yiddish theater.
Right. And well, Yash, there isn't the theater. Bucharest, there is a theater. In fact, they, of course, this year everything is up in the air because of the pandemic. But they've been doing a yearly for the last 5, 6, 7 years, big Yiddish festival in November, usually, where other artists from around the world come and new plays. So the Yiddish State Theater in Bucharest, in the same place it was originated, in the old Jewish quarters where very few Jews live now. Actually, a lot of Roma live there. Is still going. They have a new director. The director for a while was a very famous Romanian actress, but I can't remember her name, but she played in some American films too. But so there is interest. There's interest among the Romanian population, Romanian Gentile, as well as the Jewish. And it's going to need that because the Jewish population of Romania is not growing. Who knows, 10,000. It's not a lot of Jews, and not a lot where there was once about 780,000 Jews. So it's there, and I think what's keeping it going is also the interest from other places like England, America, Israel, where there's this renaissance of looking at Yiddish culture, and so artists are willing to go back there, do internships, bring their music and art there, and they're also doing new plays, you know, and Romania has just a great history of some wonderful literature. So it's continuing. Bucharest is a Yiddish theater. Warsaw. Those are the only two places in Eastern Europe. Moscow used to. I don't believe they have anymore. And then New York. So there aren't, in terms of legitimate, you know, not like, oh, we're doing a festival, we'll just pop it up here. Where there is a building and it's for Yiddish theater. There's less than 5 in the world, and I can only think of 3 right now.
Thank you. We are hitting our time limit here at the moment, but if there's any other questions, we can take one more.
I had one.
Uh-huh.
How about the Tomaszewski family? Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, the Tomaszewski family, right? Who the grandson, Michael Tilson Thomas, where he got his name, Thomas. He didn't say. Should have kept it Michael Tilson Tomaszewski. Boris and his what is his wife's name? I'm forgetting it right now. But impresario, huge, putting on big plays, had a big troupe, very influential. They lived a very good life. There was a documentary on them, High Life. They did very well. They focused and only did Yiddish theater. He did not cross over into Broadway. Some actors sing his praises, others not so much, because he was very hard. It could be very, and he could be very mean sometimes to actors and actresses. You know, again, the peripatetic life of those. But the Tomaszewski's very, very a proud family, very well known, very important to the development of Yiddish musical theater in New York City, and of course, then how it spread. And there is it's called the Tomaszewski Project. For those of you, I don't know your name, but you're asking the question. Good question. If you just put in Tomaszewski Project into Google, then you can read a whole big thing about this project. You know, sort of resurrecting, looking at the archives and etc. And his grandson, Michael Tilson Thomas, the former head of the San Francisco Philharmonic and other great orchestras around the world. Basically, I think he's retired somewhat. He had helped create a documentary about his grandparents. And he remembers him as a young little boy because they were still alive. So thank you for bringing up that one of the scions of Yiddish theater, the Tomaszewski, and particularly Boris Tomaszewski.
Thank you so much for all of that. This was so wonderful to learn and listen.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Yes, to Bavakasha, Gabrielle. I appreciate it.
We look forward to learning again from you soon. I'll unmute the room so people can all say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Buon semestre.
Bye-bye.